congratulations on the brand new album. I've had a chance to sit down and take a listen. Congratulations.
Thank you, man. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
So I was wondering if you could start off by telling us a little bit about what kind of things were inspiring the songwriting this time around.
Well, I mean, it basically all kind of happened when Anders and I more or less accidentally met back in 2014. I was filling in on a couple of gigs for Satyricon, and he plays bass for them, which I didn't actually fully know at the time. But anyways, I realized, oh wait, this is Anders from that band CADAVER I loved when I was a kid, and so we just kind of sat down, and he played me some more recent demos he had made, and from there came the idea of like, hey, why don't we try and turn this into a record at some point. So over the years we just kind of worked on it, and some ideas came and were discarded, and at some point we kind of changed direction of what we were doing, but eventually it all came together. And I think a touchstone for me personally was definitely the early works of CADAVER, in the sense that really had a huge influence on me as a teenager. And so I wanted to kind of bring that raw energy that I felt from those early records. I did follow the band their whole career, but probably the early impact is always the biggest, right, when you first discover a band. So for me, Hallucinating Anxiety was always kind of a masterpiece of an old school death metal album that just had its unique vibe and sound. So without saying that we tried to replicate that album, because we didn't, I would say that was kind of a starting point, and from there it kind of evolved into just our own version of what raw, old school Norwegian death metal would be in 2020, I guess.
Yeah. That moment when you met Anders, how did that make you feel? Like you said, this was a band that you listened to growing up. What was that like when you first started to talk to Anders and he suggested working with you?
I mean, it was really cool because it was very just fun and natural and no pressure. When I recognized that, wait, Anders Odden, I know that name, when I recognized that and I put two and two together, and I told him, he was really stoked to see that I knew CADAVER and that I was a fan of the band and had actually seen them live when they were CADAVER Inc. in the early 2000s. So we talked about all that, and I said, yeah, man, I said, people love the band, I know other people who are huge fans, and it had a huge impact on me what you guys were doing. I really thought CADAVER had its own sound even back in the day, in the early days. So he was stoked about that, and so it just kind of became a friendship from there, and an organic process all the way. I would consider him a friend first and foremost, and then we also now make music together. But of course, it's a huge honor, and it's so cool when you realize that your musical idols are also just down to earth dudes who know what's up. It's really nice, and I think it's one of the best things about the world of metal is that in the end, most people you meet are just cool guys, or cool girls. Like, they're just people who love the same kind of things that you do, and when you open that connection, there's cool stuff like this album can happen.
Yeah. Look, for the younger metal fans listening, how important were CADAVER to the metal scene? Like, I know for us ones who were around during that time, we know they changed a lot of things, but for the younger metal fans listening, tell us a little bit about how you feel CADAVER changed the metal scene and set about their own sound.
Well, I mean, I think there were a few things about CADAVER that really stood out. I think not only were they the first Norwegian death metal band to kind of break out, and to kind of have a name for themselves, I think they also, from the get-go, really showed a desire to diversify things. Like, for example, if you compare the first album to the second album, In Pains, that record was a lot more influenced by bands like Voivod, for example, and had a lot less of the typical old-school death metal sound, but rather something more progressive and twisted and weird. And fast forward to the next two records, the same thing. They always kind of pushed boundaries and did what they wanted to do. And in that sense, I think they, brought kind of their own thing to the table. I don't know that they really necessarily changed the metal scene, per se. Yep. It's hard for me to judge that. But I do know that, they left a mark on me. They stood out. They weren't one of those bands that, played death metal, but sounded a lot like many other bands. They kind of just did it their own way, and to me, that's a mark of what should I say? Like, I mean, that's a proof that there's a real reason for the band to exist. I always think that when you make music, you gotta build your own voice, and even if that takes time and you don't do it from the very first release or whatever, over time you got to find your voice and you got to find your own path and follow that, even if it means taking risks and maybe alienating some fans.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned that the work that you were working on this time, the music, that it changed direction a little bit. Tell us a little bit about how it changed direction to get to what we hear now.
Well, when we started out, Anders, like I mentioned, had, when we started talking about this, he said he had some demos that he had worked on over the years, and so our natural next step was to kind of take some of those and work on them. And so he would send me guitars, and I would record some drums in my home studio here, and we'd kind of see where that took us. But then a few years later, in 2016, when I was in Norway with Megadeth, we actually got the chance to jam together. Because I had that morning off before the show, and so I went to his place and we just jammed and did actually one of the tunes that ended up on the record called Feed the Pigs, and that kind of solidified the new direction, I would say. So at that point, us actually physically playing together and just kind of jamming it out and making a raw recording of that song was the starting point of what eventually became Eder and Bile. So some of the earlier demos at that point that we had worked on, we discarded because we thought, maybe that's not exactly the direction we want to go in.
Yep.
And so Feed the Pigs became a blueprint for what came next in a way, and we decided to just fully embrace all of our influences from back in the day and then kind of, run them through the Cadaver grinder and spit them out on the other side. And I think in the end it's a really diverse but solid death metal album that has all the organic and primal vibes that I love in my death metal, especially growing up.
Yeah, definitely. And you guys are so busy with other projects and other bands as well. How difficult was it to get together and even jam out the tracks in the first place? And then how difficult was it to actually get together and record the album?
Yeah, I mean, well, besides that one jam I mentioned, we didn't really get to jam really because of our schedules. So eventually I convinced Anders to come out here to LA, which he has friends here and stuff, and he's obviously been here a bunch of times, like when he played with Celtic Frost and other bands. So I convinced him to come out here and do the album, and we decided to make the recording kind of our jam session, if you will. So we decided I really pushed for us recording the old school way, which is instead of, having pre-recorded scratch guitars and me drumming to those, I was like, let's play together,
Yep.
Let's just be in the same room and play through those songs. Let's not use a click track, which we only ended up using on a pair of songs, I think. Most of the songs were done just loosely, and we just played until we had good takes, and those were kind of the jam sessions because some of the songs evolved in that as well. As we would play them a couple of times, we'd be like, maybe this part needs to be more like this, and this part can speed up a little bit, and that riff is maybe too long. So, up to the very last minute when we were recording, things evolved, and then I think you can really hear on the album the kind of the interplay between Anders and myself, which is something that I think, unfortunately, nowadays with modern recording techniques, it tends to get lost. You don't really have that, that people in the room jamming together feel enough anymore. And I miss that. There are more bands again doing it now, which makes me really excited. And I definitely wanted Cadaver, this new album to be made that way. So yeah, we make it work. It's not easy to find the time always, but we make it work.
I find also when a band's all in the studio recording, it sounds a lot rawer and a lot more like it would live. Is that something that you find as well?
Absolutely. That's my whole motivation for doing this. And I think before the modern recording techniques we use now existed, that was the only option, really. So people had to practice until they could play their songs together well, and and that created a sort of natural interplay between musicians that made bands stand out and gave bands their own sound, because anybody can play to a click track. If you practice enough, you can play to a click track, and then you can line everything up and make it all perfect. But to me, a lot of times, unfortunately, that sucks a lot of the life out of the performances, and it makes people not sound like themselves, because the truth is, like for drummers, for example, I'll speak for drummers, a drummer's swing, in my mind, a lot of times is made up out of the little mistakes that drummer makes. And they're not like, oh, he made a mistake kind of mistake, but they're more like, oh, whenever he, plays a 4th 16th note kick or something, it's a little bit early. Like, I do that, for example. My 4th 16th notes are always slightly ahead,
Yep.
And so, on the kick, for example. So that's what, and then there's other things like that. So that's what creates my sound versus another drummer who's playing the exact same part, And so, allowing that to exist and allowing that kind of, to take on a life on its own, I think really benefits the music in the end, especially when you're talking about something like death metal.
Yeah, definitely. And, of course, this pandemic coming about, this has probably upset some of the plans that you guys had, but where to now for the band? Like, are you guys going to look to tour? Are you already starting to work on new music because you've been off the road this year? What are the plans for the band going forward?
Yes to both. There were some shows and tours planned, which obviously, like all others, have been canceled or postponed. I know that there's a tour in Europe with Atheists that's still on the books for, I think, sometime in the spring, but honestly, I'm not sure that will happen. It remains to be seen, Everything else is kind of up in the air when it comes to playing live, but the band will definitely perform live. If I will be there, that's another question, because obviously my priority is with Megadeth, and as soon as, playing live is a thing again, Megadeth is going to be playing a lot of shows, so I'll probably not be there for a lot of the Cadaver shows, is my, my honest guess, but Anders has a great drummer lined up to take care of that for when I can't be there, so the band will still be out and performing.
Yeah.
And for the other half of your question, yes, we have started writing new music. We're working on new demos as we speak, and so as soon as we have what we feel it takes, we'll probably hit the studio again.
Yeah. I know you mentioned that you'll be playing a lot with Megadeth, so you won't be able to play with Cadaver a lot, but that first time that you walk out onto the stage with Cadaver, will that feel like another milestone for you playing live with a band you grew up listening to?
For sure. I mean, that actually happened last year, because I did get to play one Cadaver show back in the late summer of 2019. So,
yeah.
So I got to perform a lot of the songs from the albums that I grew up listening to, along, of course, with some of the new material, because we premiered some of the new songs back then. Back then, of course, the thought was that this record would come out, it would have been out for a while now already, but everything got changed because of the pandemic. Things got postponed, but yeah, man, that was a great feeling. I've been blessed throughout my musical life to perform with a lot of people that I've idolized since I was a teenager, and that have just informed my journey.
Yeah.
And that's, of course, beautiful thing. It's something that it's hard to put into words.
Yep. Now, we do a special little thing here for our listeners when we interview somebody, so that we get to know their likes, and also people out there get to discover new likes. What was your favorite Cadaver track when you were growing up, and what new band is out there at the moment that you think everybody should know about?
Oh, those are two great questions. I think my favorite Cadaver track growing up was probably, let me look here to make sure I get the title right. I don't want to mess it up. But it was probably Ignominious Eczema, which is like the opening track on Hallucinating Anxiety. I mean, that just really struck me. It has the intro, which is called Tuba, which is like this inverted or like reversed, like crazy tuba, which just shocks you into like what's going on, and then that track hits, and it's just, it's just its own thing. Like, you couldn't compare it with anything else even at the time, and you still can. So when it comes to favorite new bands, man, there are a lot of cool bands right now. I really have to say that, there's a lot of good things happening in the extreme underground. I follow a lot of what goes on with death metal and black metal and grindcore, especially, also thrash for sure, and industrial. But if I pick one band that really rocked my world the past years, it would be Dodecahedron from Holland.
Okay.
They only did 2 albums, one in 2012 and one in 2017, but both those albums are absolutely, just legendary pieces of work. not the kind of albums that you put on and the first time you hear them, you grasp them. It's the kind of record that takes like 5, 6, 7, 10 listens to really fully understand how magnificent they are. But yeah, I cannot recommend them enough.
Awesome. Well, I hope our listeners go and check them out. And I guess to finish up the interview, is there anything you'd like to say to your Aussie fans out there before they get a chance to sit down and listen to this brand new album?
Yeah, well, I mean, if you like death metal, you should definitely check out this Cadaver album, because I think we've kind of made a beautiful bridge between the olden days, the days when the style was invented and came to life, and the current days. It has the raw, unbridled, almost falling apart kind of energy from the old albums, coupled with a production that, is not super clean or, sterilized or whatever, but still sounds powerful like productions do nowadays. So I think, if you're into death metal, definitely check out Eder and Bile. And on a side note, I really look forward to coming back to your beautiful country again. It's been some years, and hopefully we can play live there soon.
Definitely. Well, we would love to have you back very, very soon. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you and an honor, so thank you very much for chatting to us.
Thank you, Dave, and take good care of yourself, man.
You too, mate. Stay safe, and we'll see you soon.
Alrighty, cheers.
Okay, bye.